Commander Jake stared at the black hole through the viewing window of the Horizon Dawn. The massive object bent light around itself like a cosmic whirlpool. Stars stretched and twisted in impossible patterns. After 15 years of space exploration, he had never seen anything like this. Distance to event horizon, 200,000 kilometers, Hayes announced from the pilot's seat. Her hands moved across the controls with practiced ease. All systems stable. Gravitational readings are within expected parameters. Jake nodded and turned to his science officer. Chris, are the probes ready? Chris Palmer looked up from his station, excitement clear in his eyes. Ready and waiting, Commander. We've got 12 quantum measurement probes loaded. Once we're in position, we can deploy them all within 10 minutes. This data will change everything we know about physics. The ship's engineer checked his displays. Engine performance is good. The shielding is holding against the radiation. We can maintain this position for as long as needed. Amy, their medical officer, monitored everyone's vital signs. All crew members showing normal readings. Heart rates are elevated, but that's expected. No one's in danger. Jake allowed himself a small smile. His crew was the best Earth had to offer. They had trained for 3 years for this mission. Every simulation, every test, every backup plan had been rehearsed until they could do it in their sleep. Now, finally, they were here. All right, people, let's make history. Take us in. The Horizon Dawn moved forward, its engines pushing against the immense gravitational pull. The ship had been specially designed for this mission. Its hull could withstand radiation that would cook a normal vessel in seconds. Its computers could calculate trajectories in gravitational fields that would tear apart conventional ships. As they moved closer, the universe around them changed. Stars that had been white turned blue, then violet, then vanished from the visible spectrum entirely. Stars behind them shifted toward red. Time itself became visible in the warping of light. This is incredible, Chris breathed. His instruments were recording data faster than he could process it. The gravitational lensing is exactly what predicted, but seeing it like this, it's beautiful. Kept her focus on the controls. Approaching optimal position, 30 seconds. Jake felt the weight of the moment. Humanity had sent probes near black holes before, but never a crewed vessel. Never this close. The risk was enormous, but so was the potential reward. Understanding black holes meant understanding the fundamental nature of reality itself. Position achieved, said. We're locked in. The gravitational field is holding us steady. Deploy probes, Jake ordered. Chris pressed the release sequence. 12 small devices shot out from the Horizon Dawn, spreading in a careful pattern around the black hole's edge. Each one carried instruments worth more than a small country's annual budget. Each one would gather data impossible to collect from any safe distance. Probes deployed successfully, Chris reported. All 12 are transmitting. Data collection has begun. Checked his chronometer. 4 hours until we have a complete data set, then we can head home. Amy brought up drinks and snacks from the galley. Might as well be comfortable while we wait. Anyone want coffee? The crew settled into their routine. They had done this part in simulations countless times. Monitor the instruments, watch for anomalies, keep the ship stable. It was almost boring compared to the approach. Jake sipped his coffee and thought about Earth. His wife and 2 daughters would be waiting for him. They had thrown him a going-away party 3 months ago when the Horizon Dawn launched. His youngest daughter had cried and asked when he would be home. Soon, he had promised her. Just a few months. Chris had mentioned the time dilation effect during their pre-mission briefings. Relativity meant that time near a black hole moved slower than time far away. Their 4 hours here would be several weeks back on Earth. Jake had joked about missing his daughter's birthday. His wife had rolled her eyes and told him he better bring back amazing pictures. Hey, Chris, called out. Run those numbers for me again. How much time passes on Earth while we're sitting here? Chris pulled up his calculations. With our current distance from the event horizon, time dilation factor is approximately 60 to 1. So for every hour we experience, 60 hours pass outside the gravitational field. Whistled, so our 4 hours equals about 240 hours, 10 days, give or take. Laughed, I'm going to miss so many messages from my mom. She sends me about 20 a day. At least you'll have plenty to read on the trip home, Amy said. The hours passed slowly. The crew talked about their plans for when they returned. Chris wanted to write papers about the data they were collecting, was going to take a vacation in Hawaii, planned to visit her family in Colorado. Amy joked that she was going to sleep for a week straight. Jake listened to his crew and felt proud. They were good people, smart, brave, dedicated. They had volunteered for a mission that could easily kill them. Black holes were among the most dangerous objects in the universe. One miscalculation, one equipment failure, and they would be stretched into atoms before they even knew what happened. But everything was going perfectly. The probes transmitted their data in steady streams. The ship's systems hummed along without any problems. The gravitational field remained stable. It was almost too easy. 3 hours and 50 minutes elapsed, Chris announced. We're almost done. Jake stood and stretched. Prepare for departure. Start the engine warm-up sequence. Chris, make sure all that data is backed up in triplicate. Already done, Commander, Chris said with a grin. I'm not risking losing any of this. The final minutes ticked away. The crew performed their departure checklist with practiced efficiency. Every system was checked. Every reading was confirmed. Every backup was tested. 4 hours complete, Chris said. Data collection is finished. All probes have stopped transmitting. We have everything we came for. Jake felt a surge of relief and excitement. They had done it. The mission was a complete success. Now they just had to get home and share their discovery with the world. Take us out, let's go home. The Horizon Dawn's engines flared to life. The ship pulled away from the black hole, fighting against the gravitational pull. Stars slowly returned to their normal positions as they left the warped space behind. Clear of the gravitational field, reported. We're back in normal space, opening communications channels to Earth. The crew waited for the familiar ping of Earth's response. They waited for mission control to congratulate them. They waited for the flood of messages from friends and family. Instead, they got silence. Complete, absolute silence. Checked her instruments, frowning. That's odd. I'm not getting any response from Earth. Let me try the Mars relay. More silence. Europa Station. Nothing. Chris's face had gone pale. Commander, I need to recalculate something. Give me a minute. Jake felt a cold sensation in his stomach. What is it? Chris's fingers flew across his keyboard. Numbers scrolled across his screen. His face got paler with each passing second. Commander, Chris said, his voice barely a whisper. I made an error in my calculations, a significant error. What kind of error? Chris looked up, his eyes wide with horror. The time dilation factor, it wasn't 60-1. It was the silence on the bridge of the Horizon Dawn was heavy. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. They all stared at Chris Palmer as if waiting for him to laugh and say it was a joke. He didn't laugh. That's impossible, said finally. You checked those calculations 100 times, we all did. Chris shook his head slowly. I used the wrong gravitational constant in the final equation. The black hole's mass was greater than we measured from Earth. The difference seemed small, but at these scales, small differences matter enormously. Jake forced himself to think clearly. 800 years. The number was too big to comprehend. Everyone he knew was dead. Everyone Chris knew. Everyone and Amy knew, their families, their friends, their entire world. Are you certain? Jake asked. His voice sounded strange in his own ears. I've checked it 5 times now, Chris said. The math is solid, 800 years plus or minus 20. Hayes turned back to her console. Her hands were shaking, but she kept working. I'm scanning the solar system. If only 800 years passed, there should still be plenty of human activity. Colonies on Mars, Europa, the asteroid belt. We should see ships, stations, communication signals. She ran the scans in silence. The crew watched the displays, hoping to see something, anything that would prove Chris wrong. The scan results came back empty. No thermal signatures from Mars colonies, reported. Her voice was flat, emotionless. No electromagnetic emissions from Europa. The asteroid mining stations are dark. I'm detecting no active radio signals anywhere in the solar system. Amy stood up abruptly. I need to check something. She hurried to the medical bay without waiting for permission. Jake understood. Amy needed to move, to do something. Standing still while the universe fell apart around them was impossible. What about Earth? Asked. Can you scan Earth? Adjusted the long-range sensors. We're too far out for detailed scans. We can detect the planet, but not much else. No orbital satellites, no space stations. The moon bases aren't transmitting. Maybe they just changed communication protocols, said. 800 years is a long time. They probably use technology we don't recognize. Maybe, said, but she didn't sound convinced. Chris was still working at his station, pulling up data and running calculations. I'm analyzing the light spectrum from Earth. We should be able to detect certain emissions even from this distance. Industrial activity produces specific signatures: nuclear power plants, fusion reactors, chemical manufacturing. He worked in silence for several minutes. When he looked up, his face was grim. Nothing. I'm detecting agricultural markers and natural atmospheric compositions, but no industrial emissions. No sign of large-scale energy production. Jake made a decision. They needed to know the truth, no matter how terrible it might be. Plot a course for Earth, best possible speed. Yes, Commander. Fingers moved across the controls. Engagement time, 36 hours. The Horizon Dawn's engines came to full power. The ship turned toward the small blue dot that was home, or had been home, or might still be home. Jake didn't know anymore. Amy returned from the medical bay. She had been crying, but she had composed herself. All crew members are physically healthy. I've prepared sedatives if anyone needs them to sleep. Thank you, Amy, Jake said. He wanted to say more to offer comfort or reassurance, but what could he say? Everything they knew was gone. The crew dispersed to their quarters. There was nothing to do but wait and think. Jake sat alone in his cabin and tried to process what had happened. He thought about his wife, his daughters. They would have waited for him to return. Waited and waited, never knowing what had happened to the Horizon Dawn. Eventually, they would have died, believing he was lost forever. His daughters would never know their father hadn't abandoned them. They would never know he had tried to come home. Jake put his head in his hands and cried. The next 36 hours passed slowly. The crew moved through the ship like ghosts. They ate because they had to. They slept because their bodies demanded it, but none of them spoke much. What was there to say? Chris spent most of his time at his station, analyzing every scrap of data he could gather about Earth. Checked and rechecked their course. Ran diagnostics on every system aboard the ship. Amy monitored everyone's mental health and said nothing about her own. As they got closer to Earth, the sensors began picking up more details. The planet was still there. The oceans were still blue. The continents were in the same positions, but something was wrong. I'm detecting unusual vegetation patterns, Chris reported. The Amazon rainforest has expanded significantly. The Sahara Desert is smaller, and there are forests where major cities used to be. Forrest asked, in cities? Not around cities, in them. I'm looking at what used to be New York. There are trees growing through the buildings. Brought up visual scans. The images showed a planet that looked like Earth, but not the Earth they had left. The cities were still visible, but they were covered in green. Plants had reclaimed the world. What happened? Amy whispered. Nobody had an answer. As they entered Earth's orbit, the full extent of the change became clear. The cities were intact structurally. The buildings still stood. The bridges still connected islands to mainlands, but everything was empty and overgrown. Nature had taken back what humanity had built. I'm scanning for heat signatures, said, looking for any sign of human activity. The scans showed animals. Lots of animals, birds in the buildings, deer in the streets. But no large concentrations of human heat signatures, no cities full of people, no factories, no power plants. There, Chris said suddenly, zoom in on that area. Focus the sensors on a section of what had been Lowe's Angels. There were small heat signatures, dozens of them, maybe a few hundred. People asked. I think so. They're the right size and temperature, but they're scattered in small groups, not concentrated like a city population would be. Jake studied the readouts. Small groups, no advanced technology, no communication signals. What had happened to humanity? We're going down, Jake said. Prepare for landing. Find us a safe spot near those heat signatures. Commander, we don't know what we're flying into, said. We don't know if it's safe. We need answers, and if there are people down there, they might need help. The Horizon Dawn descended through Earth's atmosphere. The crew was silent as they watched their grow larger. It was beautiful and terrible at the same time, green and wild and empty. Brought them down in what had been a park. Trees hundreds of years old grew where playgrounds used to be. A small stream ran through the landing site. The air quality readings were excellent, better than they had been when the Horizon Dawn launched. Atmosphere is breathable, Amy reported. No dangerous pathogens detected. Temperature is comfortable. We can go outside. Jake stood and checked his sidearm. The others did the same. They didn't know what they would find out there. Better to be prepared. You stay with the ship. Keep the engines warm. If something goes wrong, get back to orbit. Understood, Commander. Jake, Chris, and Amy stepped through the airlock. The door opened, and they breathed Earth air for the first time in 800 years. It smelled like forest, like rain and earth and growing things. The sun was warm on their faces, birds sang in the trees. It should have felt like home. It felt like an alien world. They moved carefully through the forest that had once been a city. Buildings rose around them, covered in vines. Roads were cracked and broken, with small trees growing through the pavement. A bus sat rusted and empty, its windows long since shattered. This way, Chris said, checking his scanner. The heat signatures are about half a kilometer northeast. They walked in silence. Every step took them deeper into the ruins of their civilization. Store windows were broken, cars sat abandoned, signs hung crooked or had fallen entirely. 800 years of neglect had turned a thriving city into a forest. Then they heard voices. Human voices. Jake watched the people around the fires and tried to understand what he was seeing. These humans looked healthy and strong. They laughed and talked as they cooked food over the flames. Children played nearby, chasing each other through the ruins. But they lived like humans had lived thousands of years ago before civilization. What do we do? Hayes whispered beside him. We make contact, Jake said, carefully. He stepped out from the trees, hands raised to show he meant no harm. Chris Palmer and Amy followed him. They walked slowly toward the group. One of the men saw them first. He shouted a warning. Immediately, all the adults jumped to their feet and grabbed their weapons. Spears and bows pointed at the crew of the Horizon Dawn. Jake stopped walking. We're friends, he called out. We mean no harm. The people stared at them. They spoke quickly to each other in that strange version of English. Jake could understand some words, but not others. The language had changed so much. An older woman stepped forward. She had gray hair and sharp eyes. She looked at their uniforms, at their equipment, at the weapons on their belts. She spoke slowly, choosing her words carefully. You are from the old time, from before the fall. It wasn't a question, it was a statement. Jake nodded. Yes, we are from before. We were in space. We just returned. The woman studied them for a long moment. Then she lowered her spear. The others followed her lead. I am Helen. I speak for this group. You are welcome at our fire, travelers from before. Jake and his crew approached the fire. The people made room for them, though they kept their distance. Children peeked out from behind their parents, curious and afraid. Thank you, Jake said. I am Jake. This is Chris and Amy. We are explorers. We left Earth 3 months ago, but something went wrong. When we returned, we found all of this. Helen nodded slowly. Time is strange near the black holes. The old stories tell of such things. You left 3 months ago in your time, but for us, it has been many lifetimes. What happened? Amy asked. What happened to everyone? Helen gestured for them to sit. The crew sat by the fire. Someone handed them food, a simple stew of meat and vegetables. It tasted good, better than the processed food on the ship. The stories say it happened slowly, Helen began. First, the weather changed. It became angry, storms and floods and droughts. Many people died. Then the wars came. People fought over water, over food, over land. The bombs fell, not everywhere, but in many places. More people died. She paused, staring into the fire. After the wars came the sickness, a plague that spread across the world. The healers could not stop it. The medicine stopped working. They say half the people who survived the wars died from the sickness, maybe more. Chris was recording everything on his device. How long ago did this happen? The stories say 600 years have passed since the fall began. Maybe more. We do not count the years as you did. 600 years since the collapse. That meant humanity had survived for 200 years after the Horizon Dawn left Earth. Jake tried to imagine those 200 years. The suffering, the fear, the gradual end of everything his species had built. How many people are left? He asked. Helen shrugged. We do not know. There are other groups like ours. We trade with some. We fight with others. Some say there are big groups in the far lands, thousands of people, but we have never seen them. Maybe they are real, maybe they are just stories. Your ship, a young man said suddenly. Can it fly to the stars? Yes, Jake said. The young man's eyes went wide. Then you could leave. You could go to another world and start again. Jake hadn't thought about that. The Horizon Dawn could reach other star systems, though it would take years. They could find a new planet, start over, leave Earth behind. But looking at these people, at the children playing in the ruins, he knew he couldn't do that. We're not leaving, Jake said firmly. This is our home. Over the next few days, Jake and his crew learned more about the survivors. There were maybe 300 people in this particular group. They called themselves the City People because they lived in the ruins of the old city. They hunted animals, grew small gardens, and salvaged useful items from the buildings. They had some technology, old solar panels that still worked, a few tablets with dead batteries, firearms that no longer had ammunition. They kept these things as treasures, even though they didn't know how to use most of them. Had stayed with the ship, but he was learning too. Other survivors had found the Horizon Dawn. At first had been nervous, but they were just curious. They had never seen a working spacecraft before. He let them look at it from a distance and answered their questions as best he could. Chris spent his time exploring the ruins and gathering information. He found old computers in the buildings. Most were too damaged to work, but a few still had data he could extract. Piece by piece, he reconstructed the history of Earth's fall. The climate change had been worse than predicted. Rising seas, failing crops, massive migrations. Then came the resource wars. China and India fought over water rights. The Middle East burned. Europe closed its borders. America split into regions that barely spoke to each other. Then came the pandemic, a virus that mutated faster than medicine could adapt. Hospitals overflowed, governments collapsed. In the chaos, someone launched nuclear weapons. No one knew who fired first. It didn't matter. The response was automatic. Hundreds of missiles flew. Cities burned. The survivors of the war faced a poisoned world. Radiation, fallout, destroyed infrastructure, and still the plague continued. For 100 years, humanity barely survived. The population crashed from 8 billion to perhaps 1 million. Then slowly things got better. The radiation faded. The plague ran its course. The survivors learned to live in the new world. They formed small communities. They shared knowledge. They survived. But so much had been lost. Libraries burned. Data centers failed. The people who knew how to make computers or build generators or produce medicine died, and their knowledge died with them. Each generation knew less than the one before. Found this especially hard. She had grown up in a world of instant communication and unlimited information. Now most humans couldn't even read. They passed down knowledge through stories, and stories changed with each telling. We lost everything, she said one night. The crew had gathered in the ship to share their findings. All of human achievement, all of our art and science and culture, gone. Not all of it, Chris said. He showed them what he had found on an old server, miraculously still functional after 800 years. There's a data archive in Europe. According to this, a group of survivors built an underground facility to preserve knowledge. Books, files, databases. If it still exists, it might have everything we lost. That's thousands of miles away, said. These people don't have vehicles, they don't have fuel. How would we even get there? We have the Horizon Dawn, Jake said. Can we spare the fuel? Amy asked. We might need it to get to orbit if something goes wrong. Jake thought about it. The ship had enough fuel to reach orbit and return several times. They could afford one long-distance flight. It's worth the risk. If that archive exists, we can recover human knowledge. We can teach these people, help them rebuild. Helen and her group were excited when Jake told them about the plan. They sent messengers to other survivor groups, telling them about the Sky People and their flying ship. More people came to see the Horizon Dawn. They brought gifts of food and crafts. They asked questions about the old world. Jake found himself telling stories about life before the fall. He told them about cities with millions of people, about vehicles that could cross continents in hours, about machines that could cure diseases, about the internet and smartphones and all the technology that had once seemed so important. The survivors listened with wonder. To them, these were fairy tales, stories too amazing to be real, but they believed because Jake and his crew were proof. They had a ship that flew. They had tools that seemed like magic. They were living proof that the old stories were true. A week after landing, Jake made his decision. We're going to Europe. We're going to find that archive, and then we're going to help these people build something better. Not rebuild the old world, Chris said. No, Jake agreed. We can't bring back what was lost, but we can help them create something new, something better. We'll give them knowledge, but let them choose how to use it. Amy smiled. It was the first time Jake had seen her smile since they emerged from the black hole's shadow. We're staying then. We're not going back to space. Earth is our home, Jake said. These are our people. We belong here. Began preparing the Horizon Dawn for the flight to Europe, checked and rechecked every system. Chris packed equipment for analyzing any data they found. Amy prepared medical supplies. If the archive existed, there might be survivors there too, survivors who needed help. Helen and a few others asked to come with them. Jake agreed. They had a right to see what remained of human knowledge. They had a right to learn about the world their ancestors had built and lost. On the morning of departure, hundreds of survivors gathered to watch. They had never seen a ship fly. They had heard stories, but stories were different from reality. The Horizon Dawn's engines roared to life. The ship lifted slowly off the ground, rising above the trees. The survivors cheered and pointed. Children laughed with delight. Some people cried. The Horizon Dawn flew across the Atlantic Ocean at speeds that made Helen grip her seat. She and 3 other survivors had never been in the air before. They stared out the windows, watching clouds pass below them. The ocean stretched endlessly in all directions. How long to reach the other side? Helen asked. About 40 minutes at this speed, Hayes said from the pilot's seat. Helen shook her head in disbelief. The old stories told of crossing the ocean taking weeks by boat. Now they would do it in less than an hour. The Sky People truly had amazing tools. Jake stood behind, watching the displays. Chris Palmer was tracking their position and looking for signs of the archive facility. According to the data they had found, it was located somewhere in what had been Switzerland. Deep underground, protected from radiation and weather. I'm picking up some unusual readings ahead, Chris said. There's a valley with lower vegetation than the surrounding areas, and I'm detecting traces of metal structures beneath the surface. That could be it, Jake said. Can you get us closer? The ship descended as they approached Europe. The landscape below was similar to what they had seen in America. Cities overtaken by nature, forests where farms had been, rivers that had changed course. But there were people too. Small settlements scattered across the land, thin lines of smoke from cooking fires. There, Chris pointed. That valley, I'm reading underground structures, power signatures too, very faint, but they're there. Something down there is still working. Brought the Horizon Dawn down in a clearing near the valley. The landing was smooth, but Helen still gripped her seat until the ship settled on solid ground. Everyone suit up, Jake ordered. We don't know what we'll find. Could be radiation, could be structural damage. Stay alert. They left with the ship again. He wasn't happy about it, but someone needed to keep the vessel secure. The rest of the crew, along with Helen and her 3 companions, headed toward the underground facility. The entrance was hidden beneath centuries of overgrowth. Chris used a scanner to locate it. Under vines and dirt, they found a metal door. It was sealed tight, but the controls beside it still glowed with a dim light. It has power, Amy said in amazement. After 800 years, it still has power. Chris examined the control panel. Solar panels, probably, and good batteries, very good batteries. He worked on the panel, bypassing security systems that had long since degraded. After 10 minutes, the door opened with a hiss of air. Cool, dry air flowed out from the darkness beyond. Jake turned on his flashlight. The beam revealed a corridor leading down into the earth. The walls were metal and concrete. Everything looked intact. Stay close, Jake said. Watch your step. They descended into the underground facility. Emergency lights flickered on as they moved, powered by motion sensors. The survivors gasped. They had never seen automatic lights before. What is this place? One of Helen's companions asked. A library, Chris said. A place where people stored knowledge. The corridor opened into a large room. Shelves lined the walls, floor to ceiling. But instead of books, they held sealed containers, thousands of them, each one labeled with codes and numbers. Chris approached a terminal in the center of the room. It powered on when he touched it, displaying text in multiple languages. It's an index, he said, his voice filled with excitement. A catalog of everything stored here. Medical knowledge, engineering, agriculture, history, art, music, literature. It's all here. Everything. How much? Jake asked. Petabytes of data, maybe more. This is incredible. They saved it. They saved all of it. Amy was checking other rooms. She called out, "There are living quarters here, and a medical bay, and storage rooms with supplies." Helen walked slowly through the facility, touching the walls, the equipment, the sealed containers. Your people knew the world was ending, so they built this place to save what they could. Yes, Jake said. They were trying to preserve humanity's knowledge for whoever came after. For us, Helen said quietly. They spent hours exploring the facility. It was designed to be self-sufficient. Solar panels on the surface fed batteries deep underground. Air filtration systems kept everything clean and dry. The temperature was controlled to preserve the stored data. In the living quarters, they found something sad and beautiful. A journal left on a desk. Chris carefully opened it and read the last entry. It's been 40 years since we sealed the facility. The radiation outside is finally safe enough to leave, but there's nothing to leave for. The settlements we were in contact with stopped responding 5 years ago. We're the last ones left. Tomorrow I'm going outside. Maybe I'll find other survivors. Maybe I won't. But I can't stay underground anymore. To whoever finds this place, everything you need to rebuild is here. Use it wisely. Use it better than we did. The entry was dated 600 years ago. Whoever wrote it had died long ago, but their gift remained. We need to start copying this data, Jake said. Get it onto the ship systems. Then we can take it back to the settlements and start teaching people. That will take weeks, Chris said. Maybe months, there's too much data. Then we take our time, Jake said. We're not in a hurry anymore. They set up a temporary camp in the facility, brought the Horizon Dawn closer, landing it right outside the entrance. The ship's computers began downloading data from the archive, terabytes of information flowing through cables that connected past to present. Helen and her companions explored the facility with wonder. They found rooms full of tools and equipment, all perfectly preserved. Medical supplies that could save lives. Seeds for crops that had been lost. Books and files explaining how to build generators, purify water, construct buildings. This is more than we ever dreamed of, Helen said. With this knowledge, we could build real settlements. We could have medicine and clean water and food for everyone. Yes, Jake agreed. But we have to be careful. We can't just give people technology they don't understand. We need to teach them, help them learn, let them develop at their own pace. Over the next 2 weeks, they worked to organize the information. Chris created a system to prioritize what knowledge would be most useful immediately. Medicine first, water purification, agriculture, basic engineering. The more advanced stuff could come later once people had mastered the fundamentals. Amy discovered something important in the medical files. Vaccines for diseases that still killed people in the settlements. Instructions for making antibiotics from common plants. Surgical techniques that could save lives. She spent days copying everything, organizing it so it would be easy to teach. Found files on renewable energy. Solar panels, wind turbines, water wheels. All the technology needed to provide power without burning fossil fuels or building nuclear plants. Clean energy that the survivors could maintain. Went through the engineering files. He found designs for tools, machines, and structures. Simple things that could be built with basic materials. Plows for farming, pumps for water, looms for making cloth, everything a recovering civilization would need. Helen learned to use the terminals with Chris's help. She accessed the history files and learned about the world before the fall. She read about the wars and the plague and the collapse. She cried when she saw pictures of the cities as they had been, full of light and life. Why did it happen? She asked Jake one evening. If your people were so advanced, why did they let the world die? Jake didn't have a good answer. We made mistakes. We knew about the problems, but we didn't fix them in time. We thought we had more time. We were wrong. And now you want to help us rebuild. Why, you could leave, find another world. Because we're human too. These are our people, Helen, yours and ours. We share the same ancestors. And maybe, with what we learned, we can help you build something better than what we lost. Helen was quiet for a moment. You are good people, Jake. The sky people in our stories were supposed to be distant and cold, but you care, you want to help. We spent 4 hours near a black hole, Jake said. When we came back, everyone we knew was gone. Our families, our friends, our world. But we found you. We found people who survived when everything fell apart. That's worth staying for. By the end of the third week, they had all the essential knowledge. The ship's computers held information that could transform the survivors' lives. Medical knowledge, agricultural techniques, engineering principles, everything needed to build a better world. They also found something unexpected. In the deepest part of the facility, they discovered another room. This one was different. Inside were objects, not data, artwork, musical instruments, photographs, personal items from people who had lived before the fall. There was a guitar, a painting of a sunset, a child's toy, a wedding ring, small treasures that meant nothing practical but everything emotional. The people who built the facility had saved not just information but memories. They wanted future generations to know that they had been real people who had loved and laughed and lived. Amy picked up the wedding ring and turned it over in her hand. Inside was an inscription, "Forever together." "They wanted to be remembered," she said softly. "Then we'll remember them," Jake promised. "When we teach people about the old world, we'll tell them it wasn't perfect, but it was real, and the people who lived in it loved and hoped just like we do." The day before they planned to leave, they discovered they weren't alone. Sensors detected people approaching the facility. A group of about 50 survivors, led by a young man named Peter. They had seen the Horizon Dawn land and came to investigate. Peter and his people were cautious at first, but Helen vouched for Jake and his crew. She showed them the facility and explained what they had found. The newcomers stared in amazement at the archive, at the knowledge preserved there. "This changes everything," Peter said. "With this, we could actually rebuild." "That's the idea," Jake said. "But we need to do it carefully, work together, share the knowledge with everyone." Peter agreed. His people had traveled from a settlement 3 days' walk away. They had stories of other groups, other survivors scattered across Europe. Maybe 50,000 people in total. Not many, but enough to rebuild if they worked together. Jake proposed a plan. They would use the Horizon Dawn to visit different settlements, share the knowledge, teach people, help them connect with each other, build a network of communities that could support each other. 6 months had passed since Jake and his crew returned from the black hole. The Horizon Dawn had become a familiar sight in the skies over Earth. Survivors no longer ran in fear when they saw it. Instead, they gathered to welcome it. The Sky people had become friends. Jake stood on a hill overlooking the settlement that Helen's people had built. It was different now. They still lived simply, but they had clean water flowing through pipes made from salvaged materials. Solar panels that had taught them to repair provided electricity. Small gardens grew crops from the preserved seeds they had found in the archive. Most importantly, there was a school. A real school where children learned to read and write, where adults came in the evenings to learn about medicine and agriculture and engineering. Chris Palmer taught there 3 days a week. The rest of the time, he traveled to other settlements, spreading knowledge. "It's growing faster than we expected," Amy said, joining Jake on the hill. She had been working at the medical clinic all morning. 3 more settlements sent messengers asking for help. They want to learn, they want to build. "Can we handle it?" Jake asked. "We'll have to. Word is spreading. People are talking about the Sky people and the knowledge they bring. Every settlement wants what we're offering." Jake smiled. It was a good problem to have. In the months since they started teaching, they had visited 40 different settlements across what had been North America and Europe. Thousands of people had learned basic medicine, agriculture, and engineering. The impact was already visible. Child mortality had dropped dramatically in the settlements where Amy taught basic health care. Crop yields had increased where Chris taught better farming techniques. Lessons on water purification had eliminated waterborne diseases in several communities. Mechanical workshops had produced tools that made life easier and safer. But it was more than just practical knowledge. The survivors were learning to read again. They were recording their history. They were connecting with each other. A web of communication was forming across the continents. Messengers traveled between settlements, sharing information and news. Trade routes were being established. People who had lived isolated for generations were becoming part of something larger. "Helen wants to talk to you," Amy said. "She has an idea." Jake found Helen in the school building. She was teaching a class of children how to read. They sat in a circle around her, practicing letters on tablets made from wood and clay. When she saw Jake, she dismissed the class and led him outside. "We need to talk about the future," Helen said. About what comes next. What do you mean? You have taught us much. We have clean water, medicine, better crops. We are grateful. But we need more than survival skills. We need to know how to govern ourselves, how to make decisions together, how to resolve disputes without violence. Jake nodded. He had been thinking about this too. Technology alone wouldn't rebuild civilization. People needed social structures, laws, systems of cooperation. The old world had governments, Helen continued. They didn't work very well at the end. The stories tell of corruption and conflict. We don't want to repeat those mistakes. What do you want instead? We want something new, something built on cooperation, not competition. We've talked to other settlements. Many feel the same way. We want to create a council, representatives from each settlement. They would meet regularly to discuss problems and make decisions together. A federation, Jake said. Many settlements working together but keeping their independence. Yes, exactly that. Helen looked at him seriously. But we need your help to set it up. We need someone everyone trusts to guide us through the beginning, someone neutral. Jake understood what she was asking. It was a big responsibility, but it was also necessary. These people were trying to rebuild civilization from scratch. They needed help establishing the foundations. I'll do it, he said. My crew and I will help you create this council, but we won't lead it. This needs to be your government, not ours. Helen smiled. We know we don't want sky people to rule us. We want you to teach us to rule ourselves. Over the next 3 months, Jake and his crew worked with survivors across the world to establish the council. They visited settlements, held meetings, and helped people understand how representative government could work. The discussions were long and sometimes heated. People had different ideas about how to organize society. But slowly, a structure emerged. Each settlement would choose representatives based on their own customs. These representatives would meet 4 times a year to discuss common problems. They would share knowledge, coordinate resources, and resolve disputes. No single settlement would have more power than others. Decisions would require majority agreement. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. The first council meeting was held in Helen's settlement. Representatives from 60 settlements attended. Some had traveled for weeks to get there. They came from what had been America, Europe, Asia, and Africa. They spoke different languages and had different customs. But they all wanted the same thing, a better future. Jake watched from the side as the representatives talked. Chris had provided translation devices so everyone could understand each other. The discussions were passionate but respectful. These were people who had survived the end of the world. They knew how valuable cooperation was. The council's first decision was to establish a network of schools. Every settlement would have at least one school where children could learn to read, write, and do basic mathematics. Teachers would be trained in a central location and then sent to settlements that needed them. The second decision was to create a medical corps. Amy would train healers from different settlements. They would return to their communities with knowledge and supplies. They would also form a network, sharing information about diseases and treatments. The third decision was to preserve knowledge. Several settlements would build their own archives, smaller versions of the facility in Switzerland. If something happened to one archive, others would survive. Knowledge would never be lost again. Jake felt proud watching the council work. These people were building something new, something better than what had been lost. They were learning from the mistakes of the past while creating their own future. That evening, after the first day of council meetings ended, Peter found Jake. The young leader had become a strong voice in the council. His settlement had grown rapidly, becoming a hub for trade and learning. Thank you, Peter said simply. For what? For staying. You could have left, found another world, started over somewhere clean and empty, but you stayed and helped us. Earth is our home, Jake said. You're our people. No, Peter shook his head. We're all the same people now, past and present. We're all human. We're all trying to build something worth having. Later that night, Jake gathered his crew on the horizon dawn. They sat in the common area, sharing a meal and talking about the day. The council went well, Chris said. Better than I expected. These people are smart. They're learning fast. They had to be smart to survive, said. Survival is the hardest kind of learning. What's next for us? Asked. We've taught them the basics. We've helped them organize. They're on their way. Jake had been thinking about this. The crew had talked before about their role. At some point, they would need to step back. Let the survivors build their own future without constant guidance. We keep teaching, Jake said, but we start training teachers who can replace us. In a few years, they won't need us anymore. The knowledge will sustain itself. And then what, Amy asked, do we leave? Would you want to, Jake asked. Amy shook her head. No, I like the work we're doing, I like helping people, and where would we go? This is home now. The others agreed. None of them wanted to leave. They had lost their old world, but they had found a new purpose. They were part of something important, the rebuilding of human civilization. Then we stay, Jake said. We become teachers, helpers, whatever these people need. Sounds good to me, said. The others nodded. 2 years after returning from the black hole, Jake stood on the same hill overlooking Helen's settlement. The view was different now. The settlement had grown to over 1,000 people. Buildings had been constructed using techniques taught. Fields of crops surrounded the settlement, green and healthy. A school stood at the center, with children streaming in and out. Roads connected this settlement to others. Messengers traveled regularly between communities. Trade caravans moved goods and knowledge. The isolation that had defined the survivors' existence was ending. Humanity was connecting again. Amy's medical network had saved countless lives. Diseases that had killed people for generations were now treatable. Childbirth was safer. Life expectancy was increasing. Engineering students had built water systems in 30 settlements. Clean water flowed where people had once drunk from polluted streams. Waterborne diseases were becoming rare. Chris's schools had taught over 10,000 people to read. Books were being printed again, by hand and shared between communities. History was being recorded. Knowledge was being preserved. The council met regularly and grew stronger with each meeting. Disputes between settlements were resolved through discussion, not violence. Resources were shared. Knowledge flowed freely. A civilization was being born. Jake's wife and daughters were gone. His old world was gone. But standing on that hill, watching children play in a safe settlement with food and clean water and education, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Helen climbed the hill to join him. She was older now, her hair completely gray, but she was healthy and strong. She had become one of the most respected voices in the council. Do you regret it, she asked, spending those 4 hours near the black hole? Jake thought about it. 4 hours that had cost him everything. 4 hours that had taken away everyone he loved. 4 hours that had destroyed his world. No, he said honestly. If we hadn't gone, we wouldn't be here now. We wouldn't have been able to help. You gave us more than help, Helen said. You gave us hope. You showed us that humanity could be better, that we could learn from past mistakes. You did that yourselves. We just shared knowledge. You're the ones who built all this. We built it together, Helen said. Past and present, old world and new, we're building something that will last. Jake looked at the settlement, at the people working and learning and living. He thought about the council, about the network of schools and medical clinics. He thought about the archive in Switzerland, preserved for future generations. He thought about the thousands of people who were learning, growing, building a better world. Humanity had fallen, 8 billion people reduced to a few 100,000. Cities turned to forests, knowledge nearly lost. But humanity had survived, not because of technology or weapons or power, because of the one thing that made humans special. The refusal to give up. The determination to continue. The hope that tomorrow could be better than today. Jake and his crew had traveled to a black hole seeking knowledge about the universe. They had returned to find their world destroyed. But in that destroyed world, they had found something more valuable than any scientific discovery. They had found purpose. They had found family. They had found home. Come on, Helen said. The evening class is starting soon. The adults want to learn about mathematics tonight. Lead the way, Jake said. They walked down the hill together, past and present, toward the school where people waited to learn. Behind them, the sun set over the settlement. Above them, stars began to appear in the darkening sky. Somewhere out there was the black hole, the cosmic anomaly that had changed their lives. Jake looked up at the stars and smiled. Thank you, he thought. Then he went inside to teach. It will take years, Chris said. We have time, Jake replied. We have all the time in the world. That night they celebrated in the facility. The survivors from both groups shared food and stories. Helen taught Peter's people about what the Sky people had done. Peter shared news from other settlements. Jake stood apart from the celebration, looking at his crew. They had left Earth as explorers, scientists seeking knowledge about the universe. They had returned as something else: teachers, helpers, builders of a new world. They had lost everything they knew, but maybe they had found something better. Inside the ship, Helen stood at the window and watched the ground fall away. She saw the ruins of the city from above, saw how the forest had swallowed it whole. She saw other settlements scattered across the landscape. She saw the ocean in the distance, blue and vast. "Your world was so big," she whispered. "It still is," Jake said, "and now we're going to see how much of it we can save." Jake held up his hand, signaling the others to stop. The voices were speaking English, but the accent was strange. The words were distorted, changed by centuries of evolution. They moved closer, staying hidden behind the trees. Through the leaves, they saw people. About 30 humans sat around several small fires. They wore simple clothes made from animal skins and plant fibers. They carried spears and bows. They looked healthy but primitive. These were humans, but they were humans who had forgotten everything. 1,000 to 1. The bridge went silent except for the hum of the ship's systems. "What does that mean?" Amy asked, though her tone suggested she already knew. Chris swallowed hard. "It means we didn't spend 10 days away from Earth. We spent 800 years.